So I'm very pleased to welcome our guests this afternoon, Peter and Gonzalo. So Peter and Gonzalo, you would like to turn your cameras on, and we can probably take the slides down now. We also had Chloe from Lucky Generals, Chloe Davis from Lucky Generals on our list of panelists. Unfortunately, Chloe can't be with us this afternoon. She did want me to share the reason actually why she can't be here, because it would have been easy just to have said that she was ill. But the reason is that she was actually racially abused on her way home from an event very recently, and so she felt unable to join us, and that's a real shame because I think she would have contributed a lot to the panel session. However, she did feel it was important that I shared the actual reason with you, because of course this is the only way that we can stamp out such abhorrent behaviour and call it out and make sure that it is erased. So thank you for joining us, Peter and Jose. So Peter Reed is CEO and co-founder of MSQ Partners. MSQ is a leading international digital and tech-enabled marketing communications group, and Peter is a regular contributor to media publications and sits on the UK government's main communications best practice council. He's passionate about sustainability and sponsored MSQ's initiative, which saw it become the first carbon negative UK-based marketing services group. And Gonzalo Bisquera is head of marketing and sales at GSK. Gonzalo leads the sourcing strategies for GSK's marketing, sales and technology services, and looks after areas of spend, including media, market research, creative sales, promotions, and IT tech services. And before joining GSK 7 years ago, Gonzalo held various sourcing roles at Procter & Gamble in Latin America. Gonzalo is a founding member of the sourcing board at the World Federation of Advertisers and part of GSK's partnership with Save the Children. So I have a number of questions that I'm going to ask our panelists, but again, it would be great to have some questions from the audience as well. So please do put additional questions into the Q&A function, and I will try to weave those in as well. So I'm just going to start with a few questions for you, Gonzalo, then a few questions for you, Peter, and then we'll try and sort of muddle it up a bit. So hi, Gonzalo.
Hello.
How are you doing? Hi, thank you. I hope you found those numbers interesting, not as relevant to you as they will have been to Peter, but hopefully interesting nevertheless.
No, very, very relevant as well for me.
Yeah, you know what sort of margins all of your
well, I thought I knew.
Probably lower than you thought, actually, I bet.
but it's great to see the positive outlook of the industry. I mean, we're all cheering, of course, for the advertising and communication industry, because everyone wins if we're all growing.
Yes, exactly. That's quite right. And if agencies are growing and agencies are profitable, they can attract better talent, and of course then their creative output is better, which is obviously good for the likes of GSK. So first question for you then, Gonzalo. So how important really are ESG policies of suppliers to GSK, and how, I guess, do the Marcom suppliers to you compare to other suppliers, which of course are very different from some of the services that you procure from marketing agencies?
Thanks, Esther. First of all, thank you for having me. It's really a personal pleasure, and I'm an honor to be here amongst this peer group. It is very important, but I have to say it's becoming even more relevant and top of mind. ESG and sustainability strategies have always been part of our sourcing processes and our decision criteria, our decision tree for selecting a supplier. But it has become more relevant over the past year and a half. It's been, as you alluded to, a worldwide effect, but particularly with service providers, because I'm going to generalize a little bit more outside of Marcoms. IT service providers, professional service providers, consultants, and marketing agencies. It hasn't been an area of focus. So sustainability has been more evident in a packaging supplier or in a printing supplier, or an airline. And I'm so glad that actually the ESG agenda has broadened beyond what we can actually see and touch, which is the packaging that we buy, to the services that we procure. Because most of the organizations out there, including GSK, are heavily outsourced. We outsource professional services to consultants, we outsource marketing agencies to the marketing industry. And we tend to forget that they're actually working on our behalf. So whatever they do on ESG actually is going to help us show up in front of our customers, clients, and patients as well. And that realization is now very evident, that whatever our suppliers do reflects on how we show up. So we can put a lot of effort on how we improve our ESG agenda, but if we don't ask our suppliers or partners to join us, then we're probably only touching a third. So it's like the iceberg analogy, where we're really only looking at the tip of the iceberg. But I would bet that over 2/3 of what we do, of the ESG impact, is actually with our partners, with our suppliers. So it is becoming much more relevant. I think it's a big realization in companies that we have to bring our suppliers on board, which is why supplier diversity and inclusion and ESG, the overall ESG agenda, is now becoming a much more relevant topic in decision processes when it comes to selecting an agency or the other. So it is very important. It's picking up, and particularly in services is where I'm seeing most of the focus, because we thought that having a recyclable tube is the only way where we can drive sustainability. But actually, when we used to fly, all of the agencies that we as a client indirectly asked to fly on our behalf, which also causing a big negative carbon footprint. But also the type of people that the agencies employ on our behalf also generates a social impact where that agency operates, which is caused by us. And if we are not really incentivizing the move overall outside of our own doors, then we're shooting ourselves short. So that it is becoming a movement across, I think, my peer group, definitely. And I think I'm glad that I saw ESG on the 10 factor, the value factors that Francesca presented, because it is definitely very important.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, when you're sort of considering ESG credentials of your suppliers, do you do that in a structured way? Is there some kind of point scoring? Is there a list, or is it more of an unstructured feel for what they're doing?
Yeah, I think from a sustainability point of view, it's easier to get hard data on the sustainability commitment, i.e. non-PVC, net zero reductions by X date. When it comes to the social part of ESG and in a way G, there are organizations like MSD, or in the UK, MSD UK, or WeBank, WBENC, that certify suppliers on their diversity agenda, and those are very strong organizations that we trust a lot on, and we ask for certifications to be considered. You are a diverse supplier, minority owned or minority or diversity owned supplier. So those are a couple of the metrics that we looked at. Mm-hmm. But given it is I wouldn't say nascent space, but it's a space that is growing in importance and is so broad, we cannot only work with diverse suppliers as our only ESG strategy, because there is an opportunity to drive a positive ESG impact, even if you're not a minority-owned supplier, of course, right? We're talking to large corporations in this company. It is very important. I will ask everyone that when you are presenting to me and my peers and my colleagues, that you are very specific about what you're doing, because I don't think there is a specific qualification, a green marketing supplier, and because it's so wide. It can be that you're doing a lot of effort on actually social impact in the regions where you operate, or maybe you're looking at utilizing printing differently. Now we're not printing and we're not traveling as much, but it was something that we were tracking how much agencies were reducing their carbon footprint on reducing travel on our behalf. So please make it specific on what are your commitments for this account that you're pitching for, or if it is an account that you're already serving, bring it top of mind. It is definitely something that will go a long way with your procurement counterpart, because we're going to be measured as a company not only on our impact, as I said, but also on our suppliers' impact. And that's something that J&J, P&G, I would say are leading, Unilever are leading the charge in reporting supplier ESG impact. And anyone that would like to, of course, join the I wouldn't say battle, but join the race for good, which we all should win, is going to have to want to have suppliers on their list that are helping them get there, because we are also going to report more the ESG impact of our supply base.
Like you say, it's difficult to quantify some of the E, S and G credentials, isn't it? But I suppose agencies that have become a B Corp, you know, that is part way there to sort of trying to quantify and give you something very specific that they can say, well, we adhere to these different qualities, therefore, you know, we are ticking certain ESG boxes.
Yeah.
You mentioned that creative diversity amongst your suppliers was pretty important as well when we were talking before. So tell me a little bit more about what you're trying to achieve there.
So it's two-front. I think diversity within the account or within the talent base that we use for our ads is something that I think has been going on for a while, and we've been championing a lot of efforts with the industry, with other companies on making sure that, you know, we have the right representation in our ads, and we unstereotype some of the you know, stereotypes that we have, gender or race, etc. So that's something that we will continue, but we're increasing the focus on is on the suppliers that you do business with on our behalf as well. So it's actually a very long chain of engagements, because you also, as an industry, you engage other parties. You engage directors for shooting the ads, you engage freelancers, you engage service providers, of course, you know, so that you can operate as a business. So the diversity ask is across the whole supply chain. So we would like for our suppliers to make sure they're also working with minority and diverse suppliers. And those are the qualifications that I referred to earlier. MSD, WBA, and C will love to work for with companies that have supplier diversity as also a top priority in your own corporations.
And has that made any sort of demonstrable difference over the years in terms of the number and mix of agencies that you're working with, or indeed the sort of the quality of the work that you're getting from those agencies?
Absolutely. I think diversity, as I said earlier, it is linked to, I think, and I'm a very big believer in, it is linked to creativity. I think when we talk about working with diverse suppliers, I think gets you closer to the realities of the world that you operate in, and I think the goodness really translates all the way to the account and ultimately to the work.
You're part of the World Federation of Advertisers, which champions more effective and sustainable marketing communications. And tell us a bit about how the thinking is developing around ESG sort of more widely within the WFA.
Yes, I'm very lucky to be part of the, you know, there's 10 of my peers, Heineken, P&G, you know, Bayer, it was McDonald's, that we formed this coalition of sourcing community to start to change the perception of marketing procurement, because we have a very bad reputation that I think is changing. It has changed in some cases of being, you know, the negotiators, the looking for profit improvement solely. And as a function, we're not actually. We're here to help our company drive growth, have better agencies, better partners, better people in our account. And in that effort of really changing the view of the function that I am a very proud member of, we talk a lot about the trends. And actually last week we had a WFA sourcing forum on how to influence business strategy, and ESG also was brought up as well. It is definitely a topic that, as a function, we have a leading role, because we manage the external relationships with the industry, with you guys. So we are seen as a force to drive the positive momentum toward ESG. It is something that everyone is figuring out exactly how with marketing agencies. Diversity is, as I said, is already something that was in motion. The environmental impact in print and promo is very evident, and some print and promo materials, anything that is point of sales or activities on the shelf, is, I think, is also relatively mature, where everyone is making, you know, green shoots here and there, is on how do you drive better positive ESG through creative agencies, because it's mainly a people industry. So we focus on diversity in the account, diversity in the supplier, but also I've seen pitches where agencies commit to support particular charities or commit to do work in a community, on the back of working on that account. So I think everyone is trying what is the best, what is the most influential, but quite honestly, what is the most impactful action to drive ESG mainly on the services area like media and creative.
I mean, that's a worldwide organisation, isn't it? The WFA. So how does that message sort of from the advertisers to the agencies get disseminated down to the agencies? Is that through local trade bodies, or how do you how's the communication?
Yeah, so I think the WFA is a, as we said, globally recognized forum, and it's not actually the sourcing forum is the new bolt-on to it. It's got a very strong connection with CMOs and agencies who are also members of WFA. So there are regular events. Unfortunately, none of them face-to-face because of the obvious current situation, where we actually have been invited to industry forums recently, which we haven't been invited before. As I said, there was this stereotype of the function that sort of blocked that. So actually WFA is helping bridge the gap. We are being invited to talk to agency forums like the ones that the one that you're running today, and there is very interesting reports published in the WFA about what the WFA sourcing stands for. And if anyone is interested, the WFA side has for the members available a very interesting reports about procurement. What are we looking for in our agencies? What is really important in terms of selection processes? There's a very, very interesting report called Project Spring, which talks about that evolution of the marketing procurement function and what are the key trends when it comes to deciding who to work with.
Super, thank you very much. I'll let you rest for a bit. I'll ask Peter some questions, I think. So Peter, MSQ were apparently, and I'm assuming this is true, the first carbon negative UK-based marketing services group, which is a pretty good achievement. So tell us a bit about how you did that and why MSQ felt that was so important.
Sure, thanks. Maybe start with the why, and then kind of move on to the how. I think, honestly, and you can be easily get into cliches here, it was because we thought it was the right thing to do. I don't know if everyone's aware, but kind of businesses are still driving 85% of the emissions around the world. And we had a few people originally who kind of really evangelized around the topic. And so that was the starting point. We were advising clients on sustainability, and we just felt we had to do something meaningful ourselves. And we really wanted to take a leadership position in the industry. So that was the sort of the core driver in a way. But unashamedly, I would say it was also because we thought it had direct benefits for the business and for the group. We can talk later about talent, but it absolutely did. But it also kind of had benefits from kind of opening up new opportunities, new revenue streams. But equally, we were quite, very aware it could help from even a profile point of view. And actually, therefore, we really wanted to take this leadership position. And, for me, that's absolutely fundamental. And that's kind of true if you're kind of Unilever, if you're us, or if you're kind of the Chinese government. You're only really going to drive change if it's beneficial. If you're kind of otherwise, you're going to be pushing water uphill. So we accepted that as a position and really made a virtue of that kind of early on. And I think that was why we were actually able to achieve it probably much more easily than we thought we might. It is true. We were certainly there were other agencies that done it, but in terms of groups and certainly kind of international groups, we were definitively the first. My message from the how, and really trying in some ways undermine some of it, is that it really isn't as hard as people think. And if there's one thing people take away from this, it's sort of the real challenge is getting a baseline and putting measurements in place and doing that across kind of all your kind of scope, particularly your scope 3, so your scope 1, scope 2, which are normally relatively straightforward, but particularly for professional services and agencies, kind of getting a handle of your scope 3 emissions. Once you've done that, again, the challenge for us was that it, in a way, it'd been even easier to do off 2020 because there was a natural drop in emissions across the group. But we made sure we measured 2019 as well, and we used 2019 as our baseline. And then really the key first step was then we have a partnership with Ecology that we put in place. They were just kind of I think one of the better sort of offsetting organizations, but we then put in place an offsetting strategy with them and then effectively invested in in offsetting more than the emissions that we were creating, so hence becoming carbon negative, climate positive, whatever, however you want to sort of do it. But to put it into context, we're not a huge organisation compared with Gonzalo, but we spent initially £100,000 in direct costs, and we kind of had 2 people fully dedicated to doing that, and we were able to achieve it, and we're actually able to achieve it in 3 months. Sometimes I think a lot of people are put off because they think this is just going to be impossible, and I needed to be educated myself in it, but it really isn't as hard to achieve as you think. What we're really now trying to do, because we could have a conversation, yes we don't, about the merits of offsetting and etc., but it's definitely not enough in its own right. So what we're now trying to do is to cut emissions per head by 50% over 3 years. And that is a much bolder initiative, a much more challenging initiative, and it needs you to actually reduce your emissions genuinely, which is obviously key. But also we've put in place, a number of smaller things like an electrical car leasing scheme. We've got a staff renewable energy scheme, which is a little bit of a challenge at the moment, but still the kind of right thing to do. We're moving into direct air capture, and we're hoping to buy our own wind farm in the next 12 months. To actually really start to kind of make a difference of genuinely reducing the amount of carbon in the environment. So I'd say the big thing I would share with everyone, particularly if you're smaller agencies out there, it's genuinely not as hard as you think it might be if you're starting out on this.
It's pretty impressive. I mean, and 100,000 isn't an insubstantial amount of money either, is it? I mean, it does show, demonstrate your commitment to making this work and making it work properly. And actually, I guess if you have spent that level of money on it, you're going to make damn sure that it does work as well.
And you're getting something in return as well.
Yeah. I mean, obviously, Gonzalo talked about, not just looking at what GSK does, but looking at what their suppliers does. Have you had to do that as well? I mean, obviously your biggest supplier in a way is your people, really, isn't it? And the behaviour of your people. But what sort of behaviour have you had to encourage to change within your people? And have you looked at your other suppliers as well?
We've so far focused more internally and with clients, because we think that's where there's a much bigger impact for us. We probably, to be honest, the sort of supply pieces is our next stage in what we're doing. And we do have production partners that are reasonable level of spend, but it's a pretty small portion of the overall picture. So we haven't sort of done as much. But what we're really trying to do, we've got a commitment for all clients that when we're embarking on a relationship or a campaign, we will dashboard out the impact of the campaign and work with them to put an offsetting strategy or a mitigation strategy in place for all of them. And we think we can do a lot more in that area, and that could make a huge difference. But we do need to look at sort of our supply chain as well, particularly if you move towards net zero. You can't do that without sort of looking at that. And we've tried to just do kind of lots of little things for people, as well as the sort of group commitments like military pledges. We've created a salary sacrifice scheme for staff so they can effectively offset their own footprint. As I say, the kind of the renewable energy we're doing in offices, but it's primarily aimed at people switching at home. And so, if you create lots of little things and try and even gamify it a little bit, I think it starts to make it a lot easier for people.
So, but it sounds like that's more sort of covering the sort of the environmental side of things. What about the S&G? They're a bit more difficult. Well, certainly more, like Gonzalo said, a bit more difficult to measure for sure.
Definitely, I think a lot of what Gonzalo said really resonated with me, in the sense that on the one hand, I think we've done a fair bit around particularly DE&I, which is our kind of our main focus from a social point of view. We've tripled the number of apprenticeships we've done this year. We've put mandatory training in, unconscious bias, a lot of things a lot of people have done. But I personally kind of give us a best 7 out of 10 on DE&I, and I kind of give the industry about the same from an agency sort of point of view. So we're actually sort of stepping back at the moment, literally in the next couple of months, and thinking about where do we go from here. And for me, it's really about is really what Gonzalo was saying about creativity. It's actually about diversity of thought and about representing your communities and representing your target audiences if you're kind of supporting a client. And I think all too often, even in best intentions, because we want to measure it, it's slipped back to gender and ethnicity, which is absolutely part of the kind of issue and the opportunity, but it's not all of it. So we're actually trying to firstly reset our priorities and broaden our priorities, and to say really focus on genuinely having a kind of diverse team that comes up with better ideas and creates better creative ideas. And then we're now focusing more on setting baselines, so not even absolute targets, but just setting a baseline and trying to show that we've improved over 2 or 3 years. And then you've got that evidence, because it is really tough to measure, I think, from really delivering what, say, Gonzalo's organization wants, which is diversity of thought and better creativity. That's not just about kind of being able to say, well, we've got another sort of 10% representation in terms of different ethnic backgrounds, in my view. And I think interesting with a lot of the questions earlier and discussed, I mean, actually, I think we think the biggest thing we're now doing from a governance point of view is actually B Corp. We're quite well advanced in doing that, but there's now which might impact some of the questions earlier. There is a massive backlog in terms of the audit process now, so we're effectively waiting in the queue to do that. But I think your point, Esther, earlier, that it's actually genuinely a very rigorous assessment, and it measures all aspects of ESG. And so I do think from a kind of company assessing someone else, it's not a rubber stamp. And you've kind of gone through and you've proven you're delivering across the piece, and it's been quite micro measurements as well as sort of general stuff. So I think it's a really important thing to do overall. Again, I think it'll benefit us as a business in the medium term. I think more and more businesses will be looking for it. And I think it is a really good thing for people to take on. The other thing that I thought was interesting, and it's again in terms of some of the areas we might discuss later, is that I thought when we raised it, we might have a real issue with our private equity partner. So effectively, you're changing the articles and you're moving beyond shareholder value and social good and different stakeholders. Actually, they were incredibly supportive, and they sort of initially sort of jumped on it, and ended up us kind of introducing other members of the portfolio and explaining the merits and kind of what needed to get done.
Well, yeah, actually, I was going to ask, because it was your back by LDC, whether whether they are actively trying to influence your ESG policies, and whether sort of more generally, do you think investors are going to start to see this as important when they're looking at their portfolio of investments?
Yeah, I think they absolutely are. I think the truth is, certainly going back 12 months ago, that they've definitely always over-indexed on the G, and I think they really do try and understand the standards of governance in particular. And talking again about sort of if you've got an agency that's looking to come to market, I think that's probably still the most important thing to get right, as well as financials and etc. So it just gives you a level of confidence as an investor. But I think that they are now really waking up to the importance of both the kind of E and the S as well. Probably not in that order. I actually think that sort of diversity, people are recognizing, particularly in marketing, but across the board, is important. And I think absolutely for the first time starting to see that being audited at a DD stage in some cases and that kind of thing. And I think the environmental piece is, it's relevant in certain sectors and it can be critical, but I think it's going to become more critical. And I think the people are going to start to look at that as table stakes pretty quickly.
MSQ itself has been pretty acquisitive, hasn't it, over the last few years? Is ESG creds something that you look at when you're looking at your target acquisitions? And realistically, if somebody was great at performance, but the ESG creds were terrible, would that stop you from acquiring them?
I think what I'd say is at the moment not quite, but it's sort of moving in that direction. The way I would articulate it is that the most important thing is still generally the team, the financials, the motivations for having a conversation in the first place. But I think we would probably walk away and have walked away is if there's not the right, at least minimum level of governance. I think I always try and be quite understanding. If you're buying a small agency, it is very different from kind of operating at a large scale, but you still got to have the right kind of basic processes and instincts in place. Otherwise, it's not going to work in a larger group from that point of view. But I think the key change there is kind of diversity. Certainly, I wouldn't say we've walked away from too many, but it becomes a point of attraction for us. We're certainly looking at business in the US where it's a good agency, but there's a significant level of traction in that it will materially move on our credentials in the US from a diversity point of view. So I think we are starting to look at that, and I think there will be acquisitions that are primarily led on that basis, certainly in the next 12 months.
Thank you. And Gonzalo, maybe ask you sort of a similar question. If there was sort of a Marcom supplier who was absolutely right for you creatively and the perfect fit, but their ESG creds were absolutely terrible, would that actually preclude you from working with them? Or again, how structured is the approach?
Yeah, well, I don't think we will probably consider them in the RFP. I mean, I think when we do an RFI, we want to make sure that it's people that we want to work with and we share the same principles and values about how important diversity is and how important, our positive impact in the world is. Luckily, we haven't found that yet. I think we try to do a good job in terms of scouting first and understanding the principles and values and the strategy of the company before we even invite people to participate. I think probably
make it to the pitch process in the first place if the creds for that. Yeah,
exactly. I think now the tougher question is, so should there be a markup on the ESG, as a supplier or an agency that, has higher rates, but it's got a stronger ESG agenda, is something that our customers won't expect of us. So if we are negotiating with Walmart or Walgreens, they expect that we have a strong ESG strategy, and they're not ready to pay more because we have increased our ESG commitments to the world. I think the same applies from us to the agency. So it is basically the minimum to be able to play in the game, that we have to share, the values, principles and values, because ultimately it is a people business. And if we don't have share objectives, I don't think it's probably the right partnership, especially in this type of business where our growth is linked to your growth, or at least that's how we see it, right? So you create amazing ideas and campaigns that is going to help us grow. And if we don't have an alignment of what is really important for us, we probably shouldn't be working together. So I think the question on that scenario, should there be a markup? Definitely not. But I think it's probably going to preclude us from working together. And it would be a shame, I think, if there is that scenario where we have an amazing group of talent that we don't have similar intentions in terms of our ESG. Now, that doesn't mean that if the agency doesn't have it but wants to build on it and wants to leverage on GSK to get there, then we'll be very happy to help, because I also recognize that particularly for smaller agencies, it is sometimes tougher to start. And we've been in situations where we connect them to the organization to get certified as a diverse supplier, or we share best practices that we have learned from working from the top 5, or is it the top 5 that you call them, and we can share and help them get on that journey. So even though they might not be there, but if they have the intent, we'll be very happy to support, especially smaller agencies that want to get on that train.
That's an interesting question, though, isn't it? I mean, if there is a cost to being ESG compliant or having very strong ESG creds, I mean, obviously you said, Peter, that it costs you initial investment in the first place. How is that cost shared, and is it ultimately passed on to the consumer, or does each business take a little slice of that cost along the way? I mean, Peter, to what extent do you think that having good ESG creds is actually helping you win work either now or in the future? So therefore, hopefully, ultimately isn't a cost to you, it becomes a benefit and helps drive growth and profitability.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting, because actually just one point, I actually completely agree with Gonzalo, but it is interesting that certainly what we see and believe is actually consumers are willing to pay a premium for products, particularly that are compliant, particularly in obviously younger generations. And so arguably there is money in the value chain that's being created that kind of could be shared. I think, to be honest, the way we think about it as table stakes, actually, that we need to be doing it is the truth. But it does and is opening more revenue opportunities. So we're getting the return in that way. And I think it's doing that in a number of different ways. One of which is that you get specific, say, sustainability briefs that we've with our MSQ Sustain business, we're very well placed to handle. But also, this year again, I think almost even mainstream briefs now have they're either built on sustainability or they have kind of a real sustainability component. I mean, just one example of probably 50 that, we picked up AXA Investment Management globally this year. I think 10 years ago, it's pretty unlikely the campaign would have been built around sustainability. It was absolutely kind of its core to the campaign, and the campaign we pitched is now running almost without any changes, and it's entirely built on the kind of not only sustainability, but actually an area of sustainability that they have a rightful claim to own. So it's also authentic.
And are you seeing specific ESG criteria appear in RFPs now? And if you are, sort of which of the E, S, and G tends to be the more prevalent?
Yeah, it probably reflects the other side of the coin of what Gonzalo was saying earlier, in that it's almost in every RFP, I would say, or actually RFI stage. Certainly, we will expect to be asked on our basic sort of almost numbers from a diversity point of view. That tends to be a percentage representation question, and I would say in the majority of RFPs, probably there's certainly a question of what we're doing from a sustainability point of view, and what we're doing from a diversity point of view. But I think if anything, more sustainability. If you take, for instance, even the main government framework, both in the UK and in Scotland, both of them, one of their sort of major 5 questions is around what are you doing in sustainability and diversity, which I think is not a bad barometer around that. I think, interestingly, that I think probably comes back to the measurement. Actually, don't really see much direct questions around governance. I haven't seen very much, but I think there's probably, it's where you get the more auditing type questions, in the, whether it's kind of audited with EcoVadis or, kind of someone like that, but it's not necessarily part of the responses. It may be part of the pitch process, or it might be part of your relationship as an ongoing supplier.
I mean, Gonzalo, you said that agencies wouldn't even sort of make it to the pitch process if they didn't have good ESG creds that are aligned with your values. What sort of specific criteria, and again, do you focus much on the G, or is it more on the E and the S that you'd be looking for?
Yeah, I think probably work in progress in the specifics requirements, because I think then we will probably restrict ourselves to the people we're going to work with, because there isn't a black and white list of ticking all of these boxes. Then you are, you're doing good. I think it's more, as Peter referred to in the RFIs, it's part of the questionnaire, and we'd like to hear of how are you addressing that question. Right. But what is more important of the 3? I think that's it's a very tough question. I think because it's a service industry, we are all learning. I think as the S, is probably the one that is more palpable. I think the E is also now, as Peter said, is probably what he's been asked more questions about, the sustainability impacts, and D has probably also been more mature in the past in terms of obviously ABAC compliance and compliance with the work legal framework of the country you're operating with. Obviously, my question will be the 3 of them, but I think at the moment, maybe because of the current situation, I think the E and the S are the ones that are taking more prevalence.
Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, Peter, obviously, we alluded to it several times, a huge war for talent on at the moment within the creative and the marcoms industry. I mean, how important is good ESG practice in terms of attracting and retaining key talent?
I think it's absolutely huge, and I think you would certainly endorse the comments earlier that certainly we see that next year as by far our biggest challenge, and it's not a simple one in a inflationary environment and etc. But actually we see it as a real differentiator. I mean, certainly just people I've met and interviewed at different levels of the organisation, there's certainly been kind of 10 people who've highlighted sort of E element again on what we've been doing in sustainability, because that's probably been the bit that's most high profile and easy to see from the outside as being the key reason why they've joined us over other people. And I think definitely from a kind of internal employee engagement point of view, it's probably been the biggest and best thing we've done in the course of last 12 months. So I've probably got more direct data points on the attraction. and I've been genuinely quite surprised about how it's yes, you said earlier, kind of, if the money was way off, you may not get into the conversation, but it's been the thing that's made the difference. It's not been something that's just a nice to have getting you into the conversation. And I suspect it's the same from a retention point of view, but it's a little bit harder to kind of measure and to know.
And presumably for you, Gonzalo, diversity of talent within agencies is really important because it tends to reflect itself in the output, and your consumers presumably want to recognise themselves in the sort of the advertising creative output that GSK puts out there.
Yeah, and listen, we are in the business of buying service that is, as Francesca referred to, 68% people. So obviously, the better people you attract, the better agency you will be on our behalf. So I think it is a vicious cycle, as you alluded to earlier.
Yeah. Peter, would MSQ turn work away if potential clients didn't conform with ESG? But sort of the flip side of Gonzalo not working with agencies.
I think there are, if you thought you had a client who was a long way below acceptable, or it was below acceptable standards, I think we have and will do. But I think it's also fair to say that our main approach is to kind of engage and to influence much more than say there. We expect a minimum level of environmental commitment from you, otherwise we're not going to work from you. But I could see that kind of changing. But as I say, what we're really trying to do is actually sort of, even if it's a much bigger organization, kind of educate and work with them to put in place an offsetting strategy, help them understand what they might be able to do. And then sort of, potentially kind of, look to go beyond that. And part of the reason for that is that for the vast majority of organizations, and the sort of live example we've had recently, it's not a black and white situation in that, we still work a little bit in kind of quote unquote oil and gas. And I think it's a really interesting, and it is a debate that we're having, around that. But actually, a lot of those companies are, on the one hand, arguably causing some of the problems. On the other hand, they're also kind of doing the most to drive a lot of the solutions. So I think it's quite hard to take an active role saying, we're only going to limit ourselves to work in these sectors and that type of thing. And actually, a lot of it is about working together. But I think, if there were, if there wasn't it wasn't a base level of governance within it, we wouldn't work with someone. If there wasn't the right attitude towards diversity and environment, we probably wouldn't, if our people decided they didn't want to work for that business. But I'd say it's a bit more in the margins rather than a real active consideration at the moment.
Yeah, it feels like it's a journey, isn't it? And it's about the direction of travel rather than anyone being able to get it perfect. Because as soon as you get it perfect, things will have moved on anyway. So you're never going to quite reach that end goal. That's almost going to be impossible.
But I do think across the board, it's. I think this year to me has been a real sort of step change in that this stuff has gone from being, yes, it's important, to being much more actively important. And so that's particularly true from an S, but it's also, and I think if we fast forward 2 years, I think a lot of things we've talked about will be doing. I think you will only be working with people who can prove things and measure things. That net zero commitments, even though they're a bit difficult to make, people don't really understand them at the moment. They're going to become critical, and that's a lot harder than kind of getting to sort of carbon negative.
I mean, when you're recruiting people, do they ask you specific questions about this?
Yes, 100%.
Yeah. We've had a couple of questions actually. Sort of a similar theme, really. Sort of, small agency. One said small agency up to 20 employees. What can we actually do to start to incorporate ESG from a sort of a practical point of view? And I know that list is endless, but maybe just a couple of practical things that they can start thinking about to get on that journey. Because I think for a lot of people, it feels like quite a big leap and a big barrier. They don't quite know what to do. So yeah, I mean, both of you, anything you can suggest?
There's one thing I can put in the chat afterwards, and it's not a massive advert for us. I think we we make about £1 for every company that does this course, which we then put into our Million Tree pledge, such as, but kind of our Chief Sustainability Officer runs a course specifically designed for small businesses with Beamer, the technology institution. And essentially, you can either do it for free or you can do it paid modules, and it's a really simple, easy way to educate small businesses as to how you can take the first steps from a sustainability point of view. And so that's a pretty easy thing to do on that front.
Mm-hmm. Gonzalo, any top tips as to easy things that businesses can do?
Yeah, I think my advice for small agencies there is to get educated with with organizations like MSD or MSD or MSD UK or WeBank, because I think the power of the small agency will come from the collective, right? So there's a lot of peers that are trying to do the same, and they are you're gonna, I think, like Peter said, learning from the people who've been in a similar situation. I know it's hard to engage with large companies like ours. It is very hard for us. It's actually hard to know where are the small agencies that are actually a good fit for us. So the only thing I can advise in that situation is connect with your peers, which are your competitors, of course. But I think this is the right type of reason to connect in terms of if we all win in this. There's no one losing the business. Everyone's going to be better positioned to be better pitch against a larger agency. So other than that, I think I'm going to also help Peter here. I would love to see that link, Peter, if you put it in the chat, because I'd like to probably understand it myself. How can we help? And if there's anything that we and by we, saying large corporations, can do to help smaller agencies get there, I'm also open for advice.
Thank you both very much. Well, I think I will bring this to a close. I'm going to end on one final question to you both, really. Really, how do you feel, how important is ESG going to be going forward to the success, the financial and commercial success of businesses as we see it move up and up the boardroom agenda?
Go first, Gonzalo.
I mean, it is a defining part of our culture, and I think ESG is a very technical term. I mean, we are going with humanity as our core mission, delivering everyday healthcare with humanity, and because the word humanity encompasses a lot, it encompasses social, and definitely the E as well. It is, I think, is going to be the reason why people join your company, the reason why our customers buy our products, and it's not going to be a differentiator anymore. And I think that'll be a good ambition. That is just table stakes, as you said, Peter. It's just everyone is doing it. So if you're not doing it, and I think human behavior, I learned, is more influenced by where you're losing versus what you're winning. So this is not about you winning more businesses. It's about you losing the opportunity, and the risk of losing does motivate people. So I think the future is, if we're not there, we're going to lose.
Yeah, I think that's right. Peter?
Yeah, I mean, I was going to say that I think it's certainly going to become in the top 1 or 2 considerations of kind of almost any company kind of out there. But also, I do agree it's going to rapidly become no longer a differentiator, which has got to be a good thing across every single element of it. I mean, there's an interesting sort of Accenture study that's done this year. It's pretty comprehensive around ESG, and there is an absolute direct correlation at the moment between actually performance against ESG and EBITDA performance across. So it's already driving kind of better business. So that will encourage more people to kind of get behind it. But I do think the broader societal pressures, as Gonzalo says, are probably the most important things here. And if you don't take all of them seriously, that consumers are ultimately going to vote for their feet, and that's going to come down and impact sort of potentially larger businesses first, but down to agencies at the end as well.
Well, thank you very much. Thank you both so much for sharing your thoughts with us and joining us this afternoon. It's been fascinating. And thank you to everyone in the audience for joining us as well. The session has been recorded, so as long as Peter and Gonzalo are happy for us to share that recording, just checking whether I asked you both, then it will be available. So please do share that with your peers and colleagues who haven't been able to make it this afternoon. I think that's all there is to say. So thank you very much. I hope you all enjoy the rest of your day, what's left of it. And for anyone who I don't see beforehand, have a fantastic Christmas. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.